Hello everyone! In this video, we'll see how to update our inventory, so every time that we add new items to the inventory, if we already have some of the same class, then it will just be added to this line without creating a new line. By that I mean that so far, the approach we have is that if I collect objects, so here I'm collecting one shield, here I'm collecting another shield, then I'm collecting a sword. If I go into my inventory, I can see that I have the 3 objects, but I have 2 shields that are on 2 different lines. And in that case, it will be more practical to have shield and then the number of shields that I have in that case too. To do that, we're going to create 2 different functions. One to actually update the inventory, and one to see if we already have an item in the inventory of the class that we are trying to pick up. If so, we update the inventory. If it's a new item, we just add a new item to the inventory, just like we saw in the first video. Now, before we start diving into the code for this video, I noticed one tiny problem in the code from the previous video when we are working on the UI. So back into the BP third person character, we have this flip-flop function that every time that allows us to open and close the inventory when we press the I key. And when we want to close the inventory, we first set the visibility to hidden, then we go into set input mode game only. So between those two things, what I want to do is simply set the widget inventory to nothing. So I'm just gonna set, and see here I'm not gonna select any assets, it's just gonna be empty, and I'm just gonna compile that, and we'll see in the end of the video why this can be a problem. To start off, what I will do here is go into my inventory, and in my struct item, I'm gonna add a new variable, and I'm gonna name that quantity. And the type will be int, and actually I'm gonna add a new variable called id. Or in that case actually item ID, and this will be of type string. I will save that. Quantity and item ID will be the 2 variables we're going to use to identify objects and update first the number of items we have by updating the quantity field, and then the item ID will be used to see if we have one item or not in our inventory already, and if so we can update it, and if it's not something we have, then we add a new item to the inventory. So now that I have this ready, I can go into my BPC inventory class, where in the first video we created a function called add to inventory. Here I'm going to add a new function called update inventory. As the name indicates, this function will be used to update the inventory. First, I will look for a for each loop with break, connect that, and as an array, I will need to have an inventory, and in that case I can just take the inventory we declared in the first video. So I'm looping through every item of the inventory here. Once I'm looping through every item, I'm going to look for a branch, and I want to check one condition. I want to see if this item is already in the inventory. So to check this, I'm getting the array element here, and from there I'm getting a block struct item. We can see there's a lot of different variables here now. This is all the variables we created from the struct item. And in that case, what matters here is the item ID. From there, I'm going to look for equal. And in the string category, I want to look for equal exactly string. And I need to compare this string, so the item of the inventory that we possibly already have, I want to compare the ID it has to the ID of the new object we're getting. So the new object, just like we did in the first video, the update inventory function that we are creating right now has one input, which is, just gonna make that bigger, which is the item we are trying to add. So the item is of type struct item. So this is so far exactly like the add to inventory function. We have one input item of type struct item. This is the item we're trying to add to the inventory, and if we already have it, then we're updating the part of the inventory that tells us that we already have this item. And so from this item here, I will do the exact same thing, look for break struct item, and once again get the item ID, and connect that together. Can minimize that. So right now we're doing the exact same things on 2 different objects, the new item we're trying to get, and the item of the inventory that may possibly already have the same ID, or in other words, may already be in the inventory. So if this is the case, our branch, the condition of a branch, is matched. So if this is the case, then I will, for example, print like update inventory. And if this is not the case, I will print not updating. But obviously, this is not what we want here. This would be fine to debug options here, to debug what we're doing. But in that case, I don't want to simply debug, I want to have some logic to go forward. So with this function, what matters is just the true result of the branch. We don't really care about false, so I can remove this statement and not care about false. I will remove the first print string, and I'm gonna look for a sequence node because I want to do two different things. The first thing I want to do is increase the number of items we have. So we found that the item I'm trying to out of the inventory is already in this inventory. So instead of having one item in one line and a second item of the same type on a different line, what I want to say is on the same line, hey, I have this item, so actually quantity of this is not 1 anymore, but it's going to be 2. So in that case, I'm just going to update things by 1. So I'm going to look for a plus plus. In that case, I want increment int. In that case, I'm just increasing the value by 1, but if you want to have more, you can simply look for an add node. So I'm going to stick with the incrementation here. And what I want to increment in this case is the quantity here. I have this item quantity, whatever it is, I want to increment that by 1. I want to say, here, I already have this type of item, so I'm adding a new one to this. So now it's connected. So now that I know we can update the quantity I have, I need to update that directly onto the right item. I don't want to increase the number of swords I have. If I'm picking up a shield, I want to get the actual shield. So in that case, I want to look at the objects of the object that is getting updated. So in that case, this is the array element where this condition was true, where this branch condition is true. From there, I will get the function setMembers in struct item. And I will connect that together. So I will update the object in the array accordingly. So I'm getting the right object, but I also need to update the quantity. So in that case, by default, the pins are invisible. So you can get more options here by clicking on the default category and showing quantity. So we have quantity here. This will update to 0. That's not what we want to. What we want is to have the current number plus 1. I just have to drag from the incrementation here to the quantity. So I'm getting the old quantity plus 1, and that will be the new quantity here. While it may seem that we should stop here, and because the logic has been achieved, we are updating the quantity, what we need to do here is actually get one more node called setArrayElement. I want to actually update my inventory array. I'm gonna get the inventory here, the variable I have. This will be my target array. We need to know which item at which index we're updating. So simply from index, go right back into at the very beginning, the for each loop with break. We connect that to the array index. So we're telling the engine that we are updating this inventory, and we're updating one specific item at the index of where the loop found that we have a match. And for the item, this will simply be the struct out that we get here. So that's it for the update function inventory. So I can compile and save. So now we have two different functions in BPC inventory, one to add a new item to it, and one to update the inventory in case we already have this item. And actually I just realized right now that in my sequence, this is the first part of the sequence, we're adding something to the inventory. The second part is once we've done that, we added something to a new inventory, we don't have to loop anymore. We got the right item we needed, we don't need to loop again. So we can just connect the second node of the sequence into the break of the for each loop. Just gonna make that look slightly nicer by adding pins here. Here we go. Here we go. And now I can compile and save. The second function will be into our interactable object. So I'm going to open the BP interactable object that I have. And in there, we had this logic from the very first video, where if we are interacting with this object, we are adding the object to the inventory. However, this will not be enough, because right now we need to also check if we only have an item to update if this is the case. So what I'm going to do is move things a bit. As BP third person character class we have, I'm going to get it and I'm going to promote it to a variable. I'm going to call that BP third person. This is not a necessary step here. This is just to help you make the code look cleaner, because things can get messy very quickly. So in that case, I can remove this connection here and simply use my BP get third person here. This way, the logic for add to inventory, I will simply move it over here for now. So from the cast, we are setting a variable BP third person that we will reuse throughout the logic. And from there, I want a branch. And this first branch will check if the inventory is empty, like completely empty or not. Just gonna remove that. So in that case, I want to get the BP third person. So from there, from this third person character, I want to do for get BPC inventory. We're getting the component for the inventory, and from there we can access the actual inventory. So get inventory. And an array function here is to look if this is empty. So I'm checking right now if my inventory is completely empty or not. And if my inventory is completely empty, I can go from the true node and connect that into the previous logic we had from before, where we simply add an item to the inventory. I don't need to make any modifications here, simply getting the data from the object and updating the BPC inventory based on the data here. So this is the scenario where nothing is happening. This is the very first time we're picking an item, or our inventory is empty for some reason and we're picking an item for the first time since that moment. We just have to add an item to it, that's it, we don't have to do anything else. But now we might already have items in our inventory, and then we need to check if it's going to be a new item that we're adding or not. So what I want to do here is get data table row. So I'm going to simply copy that, Ctrl C and then Ctrl V, and connect that to false. The data table is just like before the object to loot, so get object to loot and connect that to data table. In that case, the row name is item. This, because I copy and pasted from before, does not change, but make sure you have the correct name here. So once I have this, if the row is found, I will connect that to a for each loop, and once again with break. What we're going to do is get pretty much the same logic that we did for the update inventory function. We need to loop through the inventory. So in that case, I'm going to get BP third person, look for get BPC inventory, and from there, get BPC inventory, and from there get inventory. This sequence is something that you should be familiar with now, because we've been doing that quite a few times. So I'm looking inside the inventory of my character, and in there, very similar to the update function, I want a branch. And the condition I want is to see if we have this item or not. So once again, very similar to the update function. So to do that, from array element, I will look for break struct item. So again, plenty of options here. I want the ID, and I want to compare that. So equal to, and actually equal exactly to the string. We want to make sure this is the exact same ID. And from there, I need to get the out row again, which will also break struct item. So once again, this is extremely familiar to the update function from before. This is pretty much the same logic. Once again, I need the ID here. And what I'm going to do from the out row is I'm going to promote that to a variable, which I will just keep it as out row. Make sure that you connect the set between the get data table row and the for each loop. So this is declared into our variable. Now I can remove this pin and simply drag it here. Once again, this is just to make the code look nicer and cleaner. So what we're doing is we're getting this object that we just found. We're comparing the ID of this object to the ID of whatever we have in the inventory. And if we have a match, aka if the item ID is the same, so these strings are equal to each other, we have a match. So the branch can then tell us what to do next. So if we have a match, then that will be using the update function that we just created. So from there, so I will get the pp third person, get ppc inventory, and from there get the function update inventory. Simply need to connect true to update inventory. Here we go. And we have one item here as an input for this function. In that case, this is just the out row. And if all of that is false, okay, we do not have this item in our inventory, then things are going to be very simple. We simply do the same thing, get the third person character, once again, get bpc inventory, and in that case, I want to add to inventory. Same logic here. We're adding the item to the inventory, and what is the item we're adding? Once again, this is the out row, so the item that we are actually interacting with. So in that case, here, this is the out row is just the result of the object to load. This is just data inside object to load. This is the way to access the data, so that's what we're doing. So we could stop right here and go into play mode and test out all of that, but there's something I noticed, an issue that can arise when you are using this logic, is that you need to also stop the for each loop. So we have a for each loop with break. There's nothing breaking it yet. So what happens is that those two things can happen right after the other. So once we are updating the inventory, we don't need to look into more functions. This is it. We updated the inventory. That's all. We don't need to add a new object to it. And same if we're adding something to the inventory, we don't need to actually update it. Those functions can be used only one time. That's the whole idea. But if we don't break this for each loop, then they can happen at the same time, and that's not what we want. So in that case, I just want a sequence. I can move this sequence right here. Here we go. And the second part of the sequence is connected to break. Just gonna make that look slightly nicer, which is a bit hard with this kind of node, but hopefully it's not gonna be too messy. And for false, we also need to do the exact same thing. So in that case, look for sequence. Can move that a bit. And once again, the second part of the sequence, then one, is connected to the for each loop and to the break more specifically. So now everything should be fine. We can compile, we can save. One tiny thing I just forgot is once we have updated our inventory or added something new to the inventory, we can destroy the actor. This is something I did not mention in the first video, but this is very important. Once you pick something up, you can remove the actor from the world because it's technically now part of your inventory. So in that case, save and compile. And of course, also at the very top, when this is the first time we interact with the actor, we also need destroy actor here. So you should have in total add to inventory, then destroy actor one time, then you have it a second time at the bottom here, add to inventory, then destroy the actor. So you have to do that a grand total of 3 times. One for the very first time we add to the inventory. So this is the very first time the function add to inventory is called. We add something, we can destroy the actor now. And if we updated the inventory, you can also remove the actor then. And if we have an item that was not inventory, that was not inside the inventory, but it's not the first time we interact, we have this add to inventory function, and we can also destroy the actor. So I can compile and save now. And make sure that your items, since we added new variables to them, make sure you update the variables here. So in that case, quantity is by default 0 for sure, but we need an item ID. In that case, my ID for the sword would be sword. Can save that. And for the shield, same quantity is 0. And item ID will be not sword this time, but actually shield. Just realizing for the quantity I should by default put 1 and not 0 because otherwise they will start at 0. You can get that, save that for shield and for sword. And since we have the quantity that we can now display into the UI, we can go into the WB inventory that we created in the last video. And from there, we have the logic to update the name of the object we have, but now we also need to update the quantity. So now we can see that automatically the break structure item shows us that we have quantity. From the create WB item slot widget, we have a return value where we get item name. In that case, we can get item quantity. That was the name of the other text we had. And we can set its text to whatever value we want. So I can connect those two here. We first set the text of the name of the object, then we can set the text for the quantity. And the text we want is simply quantity. I'm gonna drag quantity from the break struct into the text. And automatically, once again, Unreal change the text, the integer into directly a text value. So I can compile, save. So now I can finally test out everything. So if I open my inventory, we see that there is nothing in it. If I pick up an item here, we have a shield. Open it, we can see that shield is 1. And if I pick up a sword here, we have 1 shield, 1 sword again. And here I'm going to pick up another shield. Unfortunately, I forgot to add a display text here, printing the string to say that we are getting a shield. But we can see when we open the inventory that we have now 2 shields instead of having 2 different rows with shield written on each of them. Now, before I end this video, I'm just going to go back to this tiny bug from the last video. If we do not set the widget inventory to nothing here, what happens is we are creating the widget inventory multiple times on top of each other. Every time you open the inventory, we would just be recreating this inventory again and again, so items will look like they are multiplied, even if it's not true. So we just have this set widget inventory variable to nothing, so every time we try to open the inventory, we are not recreating on top of each other this display of the inventory, but we're just showing it for the first time again. So this is it for this video, and in the next video we'll see how to save and load the inventory. So I will see you in the next one.